Hi, my name is Matt Widgery from mattwidgery.com. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a beam back in time 23 years to March 27th, 1982. The reason for this is because I was reading an old magazine. It's an amateur photographer magazine from back in the very early 80s. And it was just an interesting article that I came across in there, which was talking about the very, very, very early days of digital cameras. Before we had, sort of things with, CMOS and CCD sensors and things like that. There was actually a camera made by Sony. Some of you may remember it. Leave comments if you do, if you had one or had any experience of it, called the Sony Mavica. The idea behind that was it was a stills camera, but instead of using like a standard film format, it actually used VHS tape to record a still image on a videotape, basically. Now, clearly, this was embryonic technology back in those days, and it was at that point they're talking about whether or not this is the end of film. The actual the piece in here is entitled "Film Doomed?" Which was something that caught my eye, because I figured in 1982 that really there was nothing that was remotely close to pushing film off its pedestal. But here we are. This is how it starts. It says, hardly a week goes by without someone commenting that since the announcement of the Sony Mavica video still camera, photography using film as we know it is dead, or at least doomed. Maybe in the distant future, he goes on to say, but not in my time. This is a photographer writing by the name of... I think his name's Blackman, it says at the top there. I can't actually see his name off the top of my head. But there we are. Anyway, he's saying maybe in the distant future, but not in my lifetime. And I'm hopeful that a good number of years of photography is still ahead of me. I haven't commented previously on the Mavica, as I haven't considered it that important to us, you and me, who want pictures with reasonable quality. And with video type cameras, they simply aren't on in the foreseeable future. So he goes on to make the case that in terms of, the various quality issues that you get with a relatively low resolution picture from a video camera, with stills versus 35mm, that he can't see that changing at any point soon. But he goes on to say something much more interesting, which really points to an absolute fundamental change in the way that we as consumers of photography, not necessarily photographers ourselves, but as the general public, anybody that has a camera really and is just taking pictures on holiday and of the kids and that kind of stuff, how that mindset has so utterly changed. Because he goes on, he's talking about, the technology not being up there really as with digital photography yet. But he goes on to say... let's give the electronic magicians that miracle and assume that they do make a miraculous breakthrough and get pictures that are on par with film. So what do we then have? A camera whose pictures can only be viewed on a television screen. And all the facts show that there's been a massive and continuous swing away from transparencies needing to be projected for viewing towards colour print film. Now, in back in the film days, those of you that are perhaps too young to remember, there were two different kinds of film that you could put through your camera. One was for making prints, and one was for making slides. So if you had a negative film, then you could have something that was printed out on a piece of paper. If you used transparency film, then you could you could project them onto a film. And it was a very popular thing to do back in the 60s and 70s. People would have slideshows and things like that of their holiday snaps and that kind of stuff. And he was saying in 1982 that the public were very much going away from stuff that you had to project onto a screen and the convenience of having something that was on a piece of paper that you could just hand to somebody and show. It said the public, this is the telling thing for me, the public do not want to view their pictures on a screen, but prefer the convenience of prints they can carry about and show easily to their friends. And I just thought that was really interesting, because in 1982, that was undoubtedly true. If you wanted to project something onto a screen or kind of have it wired into a telly or anything like that, it was a bit of a hassle to do, because you had to go and, set the projector up, or you had to find some cables and plug things into the telly and, gather everybody round and draw the curtains and so forth. But what he didn't foresee in all of this, of course, was the internet and things like social media, Facebook and Instagram and Flickr and 500px and all these other places, where now it's much more convenient to have your photos shared on a screen, because you can share that instantly with all your friends wherever they are in the world. as opposed to whoever you happen to have around at the house at the time that you can show a print to. So I thought that was really interesting. He was saying that he couldn't really see digital photography, this embryonic technology, taking off because people wanted to have the pictures printed out because it was more convenient than looking at on a screen. And I just think that's really, really interesting, just simply because he was looking at one aspect of the technology that really needed another part of technology to fall into place in order to make it work as well as it did. And I think that's fascinating that the two things happened almost sort of, hand in hand. We got the first digital cameras at roughly about the same time that people en masse were being connected to the internet in the same time as well. One probably couldn't have happened and taken off in quite the same way without the other happening, however good the technology got. Because, let's face it, even today, with the very best digital cameras that are out there, there is not the dynamic range still that you get with film. And yes, there are other benefits to it. You've got the ability to view your pictures instantly. You've got the ability to take them onto a computer and sort of be a lot more creative in the post-production side of things than you could have been in the film days if you didn't know how to use a darkroom. Obviously, if you had those skills, then you could do anything that you could do in Photoshop. But, for most people who were printing their holiday snaps, they didn't have the opportunity like they do now to do simple things like color correction, cropping, and moving the contrast sliders around and things like that, putting nice filters on and all that sort of stuff. So it's really only it seems to me the sort of parallel lines of the internet being available for home users and digital photography coming along at the same time that made it something that the mass public wanted en masse. And again, we're talking about the mass public, with journalists, they went to the Nikon D1, it's more convenient if you can, get the pictures that are news pictures, instant and up onto a newspaper and things like that. So that's kind of separate, but for average everyday people that are just taking pictures, I think those two things went hand in hand. So I thought that was very interesting, and just wanted to share that article from 1982 with you because I thought it brought a really fascinating point up about just how public perception has changed from in the 60s and 70s, where people wanted slides that they could project to people, then they wanted prints because they were more convenient, and then in the digital age, they're back to having things on screens and things like that. So that's it. I wanted to share that article with you. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. If you did, please check out some of my other videos on this channel because there's lots of those to have a look for. And as always, please subscribe on the big red button that's on your screen now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.